Let's go ahead and call the meeting to order and do roll, please.
All right, Andy Bertram here, Joe Becker,
Present.
Dan Cater,
Here.
Scott Kurgan,
Here.
Lisa Dean,
Here.
Russ Roloff,
Here.
Vince O'Brien,
Present.
Superintendent Collins.
Here.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
I'll motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. And do we have a motion to approve the minutes from, seems like we were just here, November 30th.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion on that one? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those, oh, done. Do we have a motion to approve the bills payable?
I'll move to pay the bills. Second.
All those, any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And it's time for Tim's report.
And as you saw from the agenda, we don't have a very lengthy agenda, which we typically don't have. And part of that is tonight will be a combination of Kim on the truth and taxation report that we're mandated by law to present this time of year before we do approve our levy. And then within that will be kind of a working conversation on some other things that are impacting the budget or that we have to make some decisions on coming up in January and February already. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kim to take us through the truth and taxation.
Okay, and excuse me ahead of time if I start coughing. I'll go an hour and then all of a sudden I'll cough, but anyway. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is lightly go through the revised budget, and I'll just go through what the changes were from the adopted to the revised. And then I'll go into the truth and taxation, and within there is also the revised budget in a different format. So probably the first page that you'll want to look at is on page 3. I always kind of hone in on the general fund unreserved. Okay, so if you look down at the yellow line across, once this budget was put in, we'll be overspending by $525,065. It's $98,000 less than what our adopted budget was. And so then if we go back to page 2, it'll tell the difference, what the differences were between the adopted and the revised. So for the revised budget, we always recalculate the pupil units based on the October 1st seat count because we figure everybody's actually in school then. And so between what we projected last October and what we then, the actuals this October, it was only within a 1.71 pupil unit, which is pretty good when you're doing projections. But this is a projection for this year. That doesn't mean that's what it's going to be at the end of the year. So with that, there was an aid revenue adjustment of plus $5,000. There was a levy tax shift adjustment of a negative $12,840. Literacy and shared time aid is reduced by $9,044. Compensatory aid is reduced by $43,183. And compensatory aid is based on your free reduced counts the October prior to the year that you're in. And this always fluctuates because you're going to see when we look at the projections for 17-18 that compensatory then went back up 65,000. So you always see this with compensatory.
Kim, are you able to screen the page a little bit down? Scroll it down just a little bit.
Okay, because on this one it shows it right. Oh, it won't.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay. Special ed aid, this budget was increased by $600,000. So what we're using for projections for special ed aid now is $4.7 million. So you should not see where we were in such a flux where we didn't know what our special ed aid was going to be. That's pretty much leveled out, and we pretty much know that within, you could go 100,000 either side of it, but our special ed aid has gotten pretty much what we know that it'll be. And it's still based on what can change is if the state has to do prorations because they don't have enough in their pot, or our tuition bills for 917 is deducted from our special ed state aid. So if our bill for 917 would go up for some reason, then our state aid is going to go down. So you'll still see those things, but you're not going to see what we've been trying to work with the last couple of years with not really knowing where it was going to be at. Interest is finally starting to get a little bit better, so that budget was increased by $35,000. And then just some other miscellaneous revenue was increased by $27,569. And then the other thing that we're going to go into after the truth and taxation is the liability study. So every 2 years we have to do this liability study, and as part of our budget, we transfer money from our general fund to our irrevocable trust. So that, whatever the change that is not in this budget, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay, then on the expenditure side, we had some high costs in the prior year for transportation, and it's the transportation that if there's homeless students in your district, then you're required to transport them. So there was kind of an influx of some homeless students, so that was pretty high. So I adjusted that budget. I didn't put it as high as what it was last year, but I adjusted it up. But it's one of those things that you really never know at what point in time how many homeless kids are going to be in your district that you then have to transport somewhere else.
And a student can be, the word homeless can be there, they might be living at aunts or uncles, but so the definition of homeless
Yeah,
is
it
more.
might be doubled up.
Right, so it's a little bit different than what we think of typically when you think of a homeless. I do want to point out that, and Kim, to go back up to the liability study that Kim talked about, that we're going to be talking about later this evening, that's a very important point because, again, she showed you a budget without us deciding what we're going to do as a recommendation to take out of general fund to put into our owed liabilities in the future. So keep that in the back of your mind as well. So as we have future owed liabilities, we as a board will be making a determination of what we set aside for what we owe in the future here.
Does, when we get to the page, does where you have in brown, Fund 1 includes payment to OPEB Trust of $861,999, does that?
Oh, are you
reflect the-
looking at that page
Yeah,
3?
Yeah, does that include the increased amount or no?
No, because you have to actually vote and
Yep.
say what
Yep.
you want the amount to be. So this is what went in last year,
Yeah.
and so that's what's in this budget.
Okay.
So if the amount that you approve is above that, then that's gonna,
Yep, totally get it.
okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump ahead.
And that's fine. And on the revenue side, this is revenue that goes into the committed for pension and accumulated sick leave. The retiree health side becomes an expenditure. So that's, you see this twice in here.
Yep.
Okay, so then there was some minor adjustments to other programs of $36,749. And then when we do the adopted budget, we have vacancies in there where somebody has retired and they're going to hire somebody else, but they haven't hired them yet. So we have just an average salary in there. So all of those salaries are updated to actual now for this budget. And then all the benefits are updated to the actual for this budget. There was a 2 FTE increase, and that was due to elementary's enrollment increasing. And then there was a 2.2 FTE increase due to special ed enrollment down in their early childhood part of it. And then new hires are updated to estimated to actual. All the budgets in here are all settled contracted amounts. So the teachers were already settled for this year. And then all the other contracts are settled, and even the couple that are still out there to get approved, the negotiated amount is in here. So, and then the health and dental premiums are updated to actual, and then it would be the other side of that liability study. So this budget then is $98,000 to the better from the adopted budget. And then the bottom part of it, what this shows is what the fund balances were expected in the adopted budget, what the fund balances are expected now. And then if you go to the line with the unrestricted, because this is the one that we always look at, you can see that there's a net change of 1,192,125, and then 98,000 of it is from this budget. The 1 million is from the positive variance from the 15-16 budget, which 600,000 of that was that special ed aid. So if that makes sense. So now,
You know, this is gonna take us back a step or two, and it's maybe more a question for Tim. So, while our average pupil units or annual pupil units, whatever the A stands for, were virtually unchanged, was the distribution just different than we anticipated?
Yes.
So we hired at the elementary side, even though the number didn't change?
right, it went,
Cumulative number wasn't different?
right, it went down at the middle school and high school, but you can't reduce at that point in time.
Yeah, no, I just,
Yeah.
Yep,
I wanted to make sure I was tracking that.
you're spot on.
Accurately.
Yep,
Okay.
our
Thank you.
increase was more in kindergarten and first grade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good news, happy to have the people here.
Yeah.
Happy to have the staff on.
It's good for the future.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And then if you go farther back in this budget package, you can get more detail on the, you know, the revenues, expenditures, what's budgeted for the long-term facility, capital, and then the very last 2 pages is the final from 15-16. So then with that, I will jump into the truth and taxation.
The display must be
So is that gonna stay
goofy.
off?
I wonder if
the whole-
somebody,
Wait a minute,
if that
you
didn't
guys
get
here?
bumped somehow, or if it's
Well,
just.
or
if
hold
that
on a
is in the
second.
wrong mode or.
Just restart it.
Sometimes people come in and mess around with our stuff.
Too bad we don't make you guys in here.
Never happens at
Because
Dakota
if
County,
it was
does
on the
it?
monitor, it looks
No.
Don't talk about that.
And,
Don't talk
okay,
about
should
that
I
like
say
that right in front
close
of
on
his
this?
face.
Saying
No,
that?
it's
Until
not
leaves
that,
the
it's
room.
it's the projector that's off.
The reason they moved me into management.
Because it's harder to break stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
With
they
the
don't
people's
want me
spirit.
actually
Turn
touching
back on.
things.
It's not blue.
I think I
It's
hear.
blinking. The power light is blinking.
It could be powering down because sometimes it runs the fan to cool the
Yeah.
bulb.
Okay, now the light's on.
Okay,
There,
now-
that's much better. Yeah, now we can see it. Now it's
Oh,
got the
yeah.
resolution correct.
Okay, so this one I can close now then.
Thanks, Deanna.
Okay,
That's much better.
It's always good to read.
Yeah.
okay, so this is the same presentation every year with different numbers.
We like it.
Okay.
Nice template.
Okay, so this is the 16 pay 17 levy for the 17-18 school year. And so the levy process actually starts in May, back in May, where legislature will set finance formulas. In July, we sent our LTFM project application up to the state. In August, we send our pupil projections and other data that we have to send to them to get the initial levy. In August, we set the date and location of the levy hearing. In September, we received the initial levy limitation based on all the data that we had sent to the state. And then also in September, you have to certify the proposed levy, which you did. In November, the county will mail the levy notices to the property tax owners. And then in December, we have to have a public hearing, which this is the public hearing, and then tonight you'll certify the tax levy. And except for new voter-approved tax levies, whether it's like a referendum or a building bonds, which we don't have this time, what you certify the proposed levy, the final levy cannot be more than that. It can be less, but it cannot be more than the proposed. And so this, to do the levy, it's a 5-month process. Okay, and factors that can impact our tax levy is issues driven by legislative decisions. They can change formulas, building codes. You know, there's a lot of things that they can change then, which will change the amount of the levy. Issues determined by district voters, again, would be if we would have voter-approved building bonds or voter-approved referendums. We have both of these, but not new in this levy. And then there's also local factors. You know, there can be inflationary pressures on the real estate markets. So the good thing is we're not back where we were 4 years ago, where our housing values all were dropping. Now they're raising, but then that changes what your taxes are. An individual's assessed market value can get changed, which could change then what they pay in taxes this year compared to the prior year. The state could change the property classification and the tax attached to it. And then if you have a home where you've done improvements and then they come in and inspect, then you can be taxed more based on that. Okay, so the big thing of the truth in taxation is we're supposed to show what the levy was last year compared to what it is this year. Okay, so the portion of the levy that is determined by state legislation, last year it was 6.4 million. I'm just going to round. I'm learning that from my boss. I don't have to say every number when you can read it.
That's okay to round.
Okay. This year, that portion of it is 6.2 million, so it's a reduction of 235,522, or minus 3.65%. And then the portion that is determined by local voters, which is our referendums. Last year it was 4.4, and this year it's 4.7, so it was an increase of 6.83%. That does not mean that we got this much more in referendum dollars, because our student numbers are going down. One of our referendums has an inflation factor, so it goes up a little bit every year. But it's pretty flat how much we're getting across the board for referendums. What changes all the time is the ratio for what part is paid through levy and what part is paid through aid. So it looks like we're getting more, but it just means that more of it is on the levy than the aid portion. And then the debt redemption levy is our building bonds. It was 4.593 last year, and it's 4.546 this year. And I probably should wait till the next page to tell all the explanations. I'm getting ahead of myself. So in total, the levy this year increased by 0.13%. And our actual 5-year average for our levies is minus 0.85%. And then your tax base and your referendum market value, both of those are used in formulas within your levy. So if they increase, it can change the amount of your levy. And both of those increased. And what that means is, like, our house values are worth more now than they were before. Okay, so here's where I have to tell you why there was the changes. Okay, one of the changes was the equity revenue, and the equity revenue is kind of balanced off your referendum revenue. If one goes down, the other one's going to go up. It's based on 3 different formulas, and all of these levy formulas are all based on estimates. You're estimating out almost 2 years what you think your ending student number is going to be, and that's what a lot of these formulas are based on. So almost every area within the levy that you're going to see prior year adjustments, because then when this the year ends and you know what the student numbers really are, they will then go back and adjust the levy based on the actual student numbers. So the equity, it was based on 3 formulas, and there was 2 prior year adjustments. Transition revenue, there was a prior year adjustment. Reemployment, every year we have to estimate what we think our reemployment, and this, it was unemployment, then they renamed it reemployment, now it's back to unemployment, but I never changed my my slide. Some year I will. So you're always going to see either a negative or positive adjustment depending what our actual reemployment was. The referendum, you will always see adjustments. And so there's 2 things that happen in there. Because we were estimating the students, every time we do a levy, they always go back 2 years and then do an adjustment based on actual students. And then when your property value increases, it changes the ratio. So that's why more of that's on levy than aid. Career and technical, we always have a prior year adjustment on that, and that goes back to estimated cost versus actual. The safe school levies, there was an increase of 12,231. There was a prior year adjustment in there. We also do a levy on behalf of 917 for safe schools, And also in part of that levy is the social workers that we get from 917. Student achievement was new about 3 years ago, and what they did was a percent of the general education formula. So it's, your formula is 6,000, I think 87 or something like that this year. Then a percent of that you have to pay for through levy. They did this a few years back when they were kind of running out of money. I'd never heard about it before, but I guess way back they used to have it. And so then they started now, the last couple of years, reducing that percent. So I'm hoping it gets back to where it's not there anymore. So that's why you see that reduction. Abatements are, once they spread the property taxes, if somebody goes in and disputes what their taxes are and the county says, yeah, you're right, and they give them a reduction, then on the next levy, we it's called an abatement. It's recouping the dollars that we lost through that spreading of them, the taxes. And then the long-term facility, last year was the first year of these dollars, and then this is the second year, and the formula in that increases the second year and the third year. So even with that increase in the long-term facilities, our basic levy pretty much stayed flat, which is good. Operating capital, they increased the dollar amount in the ratio, which pushed more of the operating capital to aid than levy. So that we didn't lose operating capital dollars, it was shifted to aid, which we like it when it's shifted to aid, not levy. The lease levy, part of what we levy is for leases through 917, and it's kind of an after year adjustment. So we always see adjustments there, either positive or negative. So for the general fund, the total change in the levy was a positive $88,059. Okay, in the community education levy, there was a reduction of $20,577. This is for school-age disabled care. We want our levy for school-age to stay at $99,000. But there was a year where they actually had spent more, so there was an adjustment last year on the levy. So our levy last year was above $99,000, so it makes it, then when we go back to the original $99,000 for this year, it makes it look like there was a reduction. There was from last year to this year, but it's still the correct amount that we want to levy for. And then debt service, every year they will do, it's called an excess calculation. We can only have so many dollars in our debt service fund to cover our bond payments. So there was a reduction based on that, and then also because we had done a bond refunding, which lowered our costs, we didn't need as much in our debt service, so that shows kind of part of the savings that we get when we do refunding of bonds. So the total change to the levy was an increase of $19,661, which is a 0.13% increase. And of that, voter approved increase was $262,598, and the other increases was a negative $242,937. So that's just the split of whether it was voter approved or not. Okay, so then within the truth and taxation, you have to go over your current year budget again. And basically what they're looking at is all your budgets put together as a whole, how much of that budget is taxpayer dollars paying. So that's why they have you look at it. We don't have our trust, irrevocable trust in here, or our self-funded insurance in here. That would kind of skew everything. So for this year, of all funds, whether it's reserved or unreserved, the revenue is $60,877,572, and the expenditures are $61,245,367. And so then the question is, where do our revenues come from? So on the left-hand side, it will tell you the dollar amount, and the right-hand side, it will tell you the percent amount. So still, 62.5% of our revenue comes from the state of Minnesota. 4% comes from federal aid. There's almost 8% from miscellaneous local, and that's all your fees, your lunch fees and community ed fees. And so 25.6% of our total budget comes from the taxpayers. And then what do we spend the dollars on? And this one is just broke out by groups. So, and it's the same dollar amount on the left-hand side, percents on the right-hand side. So if you look at all of our funds, and this includes even debt service, building, everything. So all of our funds, 71.5% of it is salary and benefits. And then if you look at purchase services, which is we're actually purchasing services from somewhere, which is actually salary and benefits. If you look at it this way, over 80% of our budget is people. It's salary and benefits. And then another way to look at the expenditures is by program area. How much is spent on administration, district support, elementary, secondary, regular teachers, vocational teachers, special education, community ed, and it just gives you the breakdown, percent and dollar on both of those sides. And that's questions or comments on either of these two things.
Well, I think just because we're televised, I think again, it's very important to mention that when the levy, even after the long-term facility maintenance revenue is a 0.13 levy increase, and our 5-year history is a negative 0.8 something, that's been pretty positive. And
You want to take one of each of these?
And it says how we as a board have tried to run the district by providing outstanding service and trying to control the cost for our taxpayers as much as we can. So I just wanted to make that as a comment.
Yep. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to go over now is our liability study. And the first page that I gave to you, it's got 2 motions on there. All those are as example motions, because everything that we talk about, in the end, what we want to get to is this motion. How much are you going to approve to be transferred for these liabilities? So then if you go to the first packet of stuff, it starts out with, and I'm basically just going to kind of read some of this. Okay, so our school district has committed to future liabilities for retiree health, pension payments, and accumulated sick leaves. And they were all committed through our multiple bargaining group agreements. And then I think the good thing for you to know is all commitments, with the exception of teachers' retiree health, has been capped and closed. So over the last few years, there's been a lot of work of reducing these liabilities so we don't keep having them out there. Okay, and then around 2009, there was it was called GASB 45. And what it was school districts had to hire an actuarial every 2 years to do a liability study for the district to determine what your true liabilities were out there and how were you going to fund for them so that when those liabilities came due, you could pay them. Okay, so that was 2009. Prior to that, when all this GASB stuff started coming out, there was nothing for health insurance. How are you going to pay retiree health insurance in the future? But there was a general ledger account that was called future severance, and you had to put into that account what you were going to owe for 2 years of severance payments. So that was before the whole GASB stuff. So the district had that. And so then it was about 2007 when they started talking about all this GASB stuff then that we did a study 2 years before we had to do a study just to kind of see where we were at. And we started setting aside our own of what the study said you should set aside into this severance account. Well, then GASB came in, and what GASB did was gave you a vehicle to pre-fund your health side of it, but it didn't do anything with your severance and accumulated sick leave. So in that severance account, we left that part of it in there, and then we opened an irrevocable trust and funded it based on the liability study every year, and that's how we funded our retiree health. Then in 2011, GASB 54 came out, and that changed what all of our fund balances were called. It changed it from reserved to restricted. And that's when committed accounts came into effect. So at that time, the district then set up a committed account for accumulated sick leave and pension payments. So right now, we're doing 2 payments for the general fund, we're doing a transfer of revenue to the committed to fund our accumulated sick leave and pension payments. And then we do a payment from the general fund to the PRA trust to fund our health insurance, retiree health insurance. And the amount that we send is always based on the liability study. It was called the ARC. Okay, now comes July 1st, 2016. And GASB 45 it now is called GASB 74 and 75, and they have new rules. GASB 27 is called GASB 73, and they have new rules. And then GASB 16 is still called GASB 16. So basically
There'll be a
what...
test on this afterwards, so I hope that all of you are
All right.
following along.
So basically what has happened is,
Better be.
when it was GASB 45 in the past, you still had choices. You could either open a irrevocable or revocable trust. You could just do pay-as-you-go, just not pre-fund for anything, or you could do something in between. The district had chosen to fund based on the ARC. Now, when it's GASB 74, 75, there no longer is an ARC. So that's why we're here, because you had already approved prior to this that we funded based on the ARC, so that's what we've done. But now there's no ARC, and so now the district has to decide what are you going to put into these 2 accounts.
So that's why coming up in January and February, it's no longer a requirement, you have an option. So how much do you want to gamble? How conservative are you? Those are all things that we're going to be talking as we look to move forward. Because as a district, we never know for sure who's going to retire when and how many are going to retire. So it's
You want to fund it, but you don't want to overfund it and then force cuts. But regardless of how you do it, it's going to come out of the general fund. So it's going to come out now as you're planning for it and know what your fund balance is. Or you're going to, if you don't fund it, you're going to hit a year where you get a bunch of retirements, and it can then slam you down into SOD because you didn't plan for it.
Kim, if you overfund, the money stays in the account for future use for retiree benefits, correct?
Okay, so
You don't forfeit the money.
No.
Right.
No, you don't. Okay, so for the retiree health, it's not capped. It's semi-capped, I would say, in the teacher's contract, because they're paid up front for it based on however many years to retirement, where it used to be 8 years, up to 8 years. So every time health insurance, that increased. But it's still kind of increasing on the front too, because it's based on the amount of triple gold when they retire times the number of months till they get to Medicare, and that's what goes into a health care savings. But so the trust for the health insurance, it's irrevocable, and the reason it's irrevocable and the decision that was made to have it irrevocable was that we do have to plan for them payments. We have those payments. And if it's irrevocable, a future board can't come and undo it. If you would ever get to the end where you have no more liability, yeah, then it goes back to the district. But at this point, you don't have the retiree health totally capped and closed. Whereas on the accumulated sick leave side of it, that eventually you're not going to have anymore. And that's in a committed account, which the board can at any time vote to change that. And that is in 3 separate accounts by whose liability is. So if it's food service, community ed, or the general fund. So if food service would put too much into that account, when their liability is completely gone, if there's any money left, it goes right back into their fund. So it's no money lost. So it becomes how much do you plan ahead? How you don't want it, either way it comes out of the general fund.
So right now we have, I think you said 800 and some.
Yep, and I'll go into that on the next page, but I do want to say something. Part of the reason they changed it is, on the old GASB, it was, okay, when you get into this future value and all of that kind of stuff, which I did not do in here. That's what the actuarial will do. That's the questions you'll want to ask her. But anyway, on the old one, it was done on a 20 to 30 year amortization. So it's saying that that's how long you have to catch up on these payments. Well, the reason they changed it to a GASB 74 and 75 is they said that's unrealistic, that you're shorting yourself. So most studies now that are done under the new GASB, the amounts they're saying that you should put away is higher than it was under the old GASB. But there's no ARC, so you still have to decide where you're going to fund it at.
Is that what you're referring to with the current average life?
Yep.
Based on 13 years, so
Yep.
we went from
20
to 30 years to pay for this, which doesn't make any sense, because 30 years from now, the teachers that we're just hiring are going to be retiring.
Right. Well, and for health insurance, and that's the part that she did talk about, is, okay, there's a larger group in the health insurance. Health insurance is more volatile. It's not capped or closed. So that one is a little bit different than the other group, the pension accumulated sick leave. Those are all capped and closed. They're smaller groups of people. So you have less time to catch up on that group than you do the retiree health. But, you know, I don't know,
And for tonight, and you can keep firing questions at Kim, that's fine, but what I'm trying to do is give the board the big picture. And I'll be meeting with the finance committee sometime between here and before the, is it Jill that comes?
Yep, Jill,
Before Jill comes.
it's from Hildy Corporation,
and then
Jill
she-
Erdahl.
Then she'll come in and give even a more detailed explanation before we move forward as a board. But anyway, keep going, Kim.
And then in the next board packet, I'll send the actual studies that you can look at to have questions for Jill when she comes. Okay, so this was just something that I had put together. So the top part of it is health insurance. And so another thing that kind of has skewed these numbers is, okay, so OPEB, GASB 45, that's the retiree health. But it's also, if you put any of your pension payment into a healthcare savings, that bumps it over to this pot. So there was a time where the teachers, one year they went 100% went into the healthcare savings. So it kind of skewed the study, and now they went back to where only 25% goes in. So for 2 years of the study, more money was supposed to come out of the health retiree part, and then now it's flipped back to the other part. So I just hope they kind of leave that alone. But, okay, so if you look at the top part of it, this is just the history of what has been coming out of the general fund. Sorry. So the first column is what's been coming out of the general fund unreserved. The second column is what's been coming out of food services. And the third is what's been coming out of community ed. And then these are the years of what we've paid in those years. Okay, and so this is the irrevocable health retiree trust. So all of the money comes out of these 3 different accounts and goes up into the trust. So when you make a decision, and this bottom part, these are all the different scenarios that she sent us. So when the study was first done, the first line is if you do it based on the study, the average future service years. That's the amount then that you should be putting in the fund. And then, then I asked her, I said, well, if you would have to do it the old amortization way, what would it be? And that's what the bottom one is, the 23 years. And then because that's when she said, you know, there is no ARC anymore. You really don't know what you're going to put in there. You're going to have your board decide. And so then I said, well, give me then a couple in between the new average future years and the old amortization. So she gave, if you amortize the average future service of 13 years, which is almost the same as the average future service years. or in between the two, the amortization of period of 18. So at this point in time, everything that we've looked at, this is what we would be recommending is like in the middle, so that you're not overfunding. Because the other thing that you always have to keep in mind is you're only saying this for the next 2 years, for this current year and next year. Then you have to do the study all over again and analyze again. So it's not like you're locked in, and if you're off, you're going to be in big trouble. Every 2 years you have to do the study. But in the end, this is what you have to decide. What are we going to fund? What one are we going to choose and fund for the next 2 years? When we get down to the accumulated sick leave and pension, you're going to see that I chose 2 different ones. General fund different than Fund 2 and 4. And the only reason I do that is because
Can you scroll down a little bit, Kim? So
Before you do that,
yeah,
just so I'm clear, and the board's clear, this is the current amount we're paying.
$861,999. Yep.
Is it fair to say that the actuary is gonna recommend you pay this?
The actuary will not recommend to you. It's your guys' decision based
But based on the
on,
13-year.
Based on the 13, but not that number, you're looking at the wrong column. What's coming out of our
Well,
general
No, I'm looking at
fund-
the total, right, the total here is
Right, but the
929.
other ones come out of the food service.
Yeah.
and
Right.
F2
Right.
and F4
Right.
come out of food service and.
The red number that shows up on page 3 of the budget is the 861, and that'd be
That'd be
this
this
one.
one.
Yeah,
if
absolutely.
if you chose to do the future service 13 years, yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and so the reason that I think you should choose the same, regardless of which one it is, for the health portion part of it is because it's all going up into one fund. And so, and then it's not kept separated up there. There's not 3 separate funds. So if you have one pay more than the other into that fund, I just don't think you should do it because there's no way to keep track. Okay, so if we go down to the accumulated sick leave and pension, Fund 1, Fund 2, and Fund 4 each have their own committed accounts. So if Fund 4 overpays, they get it back in the end when they're all done. And the same with the Fund 1. If we overpay, it goes back to the general fund. Okay, so then I'm going to skip to another page really quick. It's the page after, and this is kind of my own little way to look at it to see if it kind of makes sense to me. This is not scientific. There's no, I'm not using any of those future value and all that kind of stuff. So all I simply did was, I actually send them a spreadsheet of everybody that qualifies for severance, how much they qualify for, the dollar amount that we'll owe them, and what the cap is. So I just take Fund 2. We know there's 19 people in there, and you'll actually see that same number in this study. And so in total, for Fund 2, everybody that's eligible for, this is accumulated sick leave and pension, this isn't the health part of it. For accumulated sick leave, there's $101,712 owed to them. Pension payments, there's $104,325 owed to them. Some of these contracts have where part of their accumulated sick leave and pension go into a healthcare savings. So I have to deduct that out because that's covered under the payment for the retiree
Okay.
health part of it. That's why I'm deducting that out. So for food service, in total, for everybody that's in there, and there's no new people coming in because that is capped and grandfathered. So there isn't like continued increases of expenses. So it's $129,419.41. So I looked at that, and then it's like trying to figure out when people are going to retire because you really don't know. So I just divided everybody by their birth dates. I just put, if you're born in 1956, and I just did that, I figure, okay, that's my birth date, so if somebody like me is going to retire somewhere within the next 5 years. And then I just, grabbed the next set of birth dates thinking people would retire. And there is no teachers in food service, and there's very few teachers in community ed, because when you get into teachers, some of them are Rule of 90 and some of them aren't. So that kind of skews it, but you can pretty much, these 2 groups of people, they're going to retire somewhere with kind of using that birth date, you figure. So then I took the first two groups of birth dates, so these people I figure are gonna retire within the next 5 to 10 years. So that's just kind of my own little calculation. Some of these people don't have enough sick leave for the max sick leave that they can get paid for in severance. But the thought is that by the time they retire, they're gonna build up that sick leave. So not earned then is 46,840. They may or may not earn that sick leave by then. All I wanted to do was kind of get what I saw on paper that I had sent compared to what the study was saying to see if it kind of made some kind of reason to me. So in total then you could say that for those that we think are gonna retire in the next 5 to 10 years, we owe them $151,977. They have $18,654 in their committed account right now. So unfunded is $133,323. And if you divide that by 6 years, it comes pretty close to one of those. Then I would do this, and then I would look at her study and kind of see, well, which one should we do? Because you're going to try to guess which one should we do, and it's not going to be correct no matter what you do. In a sense, it's going to be now or later, or take the risk, or
And the tone, when we first started dealing with this stuff in 2009, keep in mind, we had just come out of statutory operating debt, and that was fresh in all our minds. And then this was heaped on us. And Dan, you were around, and we chose as a district to be fiscally conservative and try to set aside more rather than less to make sure we could fund these obligations.
Well, good thing.
And I think
Or we'd be in
we
bigger
probably,
hole.
you know, well, we'll see how we want to go now.
Yeah.
But
Right.
there was a lot of wisdom, and you can't have these things not funded.
Yeah.
That's the biggest risk.
Well, you don't want to have a surprise. What I see happening here is that it looks like we're trying to, we know that we're not going to get it perfect.
right, but
Okay, but if we're a little bit over, a little bit under, every 2 years, we're going to be revisiting this
Right.
and adjusting, okay?
Yeah.
So I think we're on the right track. I guess I'm not seeing, the biggest group up there had the $861,000 that were already contributing. Even if we have to take that to 1.1 million, okay, we can do that, or 1.05 million.
right,
Certainly, I'd rather do that and be conservative with it than now, 2 years from now we're looking at $500,000, or a
Right.
$400,000, shortfall or something like that then we have
right.
to.
Because
we
our
have to fund
assets
it.
would be less, and it would change our funding.
Yeah, and I'd rather deal with that on a year-to-year basis than push down the road and have to deal with it 2 years or
Right.
4 years from now.
Yeah. Okay, so then for Fund 4, I think if you notice, when I put it in by years, they have nobody in the column for the third years. So basically, all of them are gonna retire within the, near future. So theirs I just divided by 4 and then kind of looked at the study. And then for Fund 1, there's a lot more people in here. They all are capped and closed, so you're not gonna have increased amounts. You could get people, and we have in the past, that resign before they qualify for severance. You could get more of them, but for whatever reason, so first I did kind of the same calculation, and the more people you have, the more, this isn't being done actuarial, this is just kind of a quick picture. So if I took everything and divided it by 10 years, what did it come to? And then I did the same thing by birth dates, and I did who would retire in the next 5 to 10 years? And this is where in this group it gets a little bit more trickier, because if they're in the second group of people, they still may retire earlier because they're rule of 90. So that's why I lump them together, and then I divided that by 6 just to see where that was at. So this is no, it was just my way of trying to look at things. So in the end, what you want to do is you want to look at both of these here where it says, the bottom ones where it says 16, 17 for the health part of it, and where it says 16, 17, 17, 18 for the accumulated sick leave. And by hopefully the January board meeting, it depending how you feel after you listen to her, what your decision is. But we need to have this motion by the January or February board meeting, where I would recommend on the health that you only pick one across the board because of the way it's funded. The accumulated sick leave and pension, you can pick differently by funds because if you over or under fund, it's still coming out of that fund. So it's not like we're taking money from food service and then we end up using it for Fund 1.
And the January, February dates are to help with budgeting?
No.
Or is it
We haven't sent any money to the trust this year yet, nor have we transferred it to the committed because we don't know what dollar amount is being approved.
So this would still affect, this still affects 16, 17.
Right. So what you have to do is look at each one of them and what one do you think we should fund by? Do we fund by this one for all of them? Do we fund by this one for all of them, or do we choose in between?
So while your hand is right there, Kim,
And so that motion that I put there,
Yep.
the numbers can change and this amortization can change, but somehow you have to approve what we're gonna fund for each fund. Does that make sense?
as columns 2 and 4 tie into food service and community ed, and so we're using dollars from food service or community ed. So if I look just strictly at Fund 1, which is the general fund, which is the main yellow line that we always
Right.
talk to board members about, look at that yellow line, the unrestricted, that's the savings account, checking account that we can use. So your recommendation, if we would go with your recommend, and we've got quite a few days to think about this yet, but if we would go with your recommendation right now as is, to Vince's point, it would, to combined,
Yeah. So that budget that you're looking at and is going to be approved tonight, 16-17, we're overspending by $525,000. If you approve what we recommend, then that budget is going to be overspending by 6 whatever. You're going to add the 525.
so it's gonna be about 706, instead of now being over budget by 525, we're gonna put this current year over budget by 706,000.
Right.
But we were planning on being over budget by,
Six, right, but
Yeah.
when we made reductions a year ago,
Right.
Yep.
the board said administrators make reductions to about 650,000.
Yeah. If you say we're gonna fund by the service years, by what the study is changed to, I think if you add this, the blue, I think this increases like to 503. That's, you'll see when we do the 17-18 budget. I mean, you can add the numbers.
And that's at the recommended levels, which are not at the average future service 13 or the average future service 6.
Well, they do it
Correct.
different. For health insurance, I think because health insurance isn't totally capped and closed, I think that's why it's 13, because it's continually adding costs on the top, so you have more.
Right, they want you funding it now because healthcare costs, they're not sure what they're going to do.
Right.
So they want the money put away now so that you're not caught later
Right.
on. Right.
And then this one, because
No,
these are all capped and closed, you pretty much know what your costs are.
Right.
And then they do that actuarial study thinking that, if people retire when they think they're gonna retire, you should be putting this much in there every year to be funded for it. So, I don't know, bottom line is you guys have to pick one of these and tell us so that we can pass that motion.
Are you thinking of, I think you already said it, but you're thinking of finance committee meeting before the?
Right, I wanted everybody to kind of hear the bits and pieces. Then I wanted to pull together with the finance committee and just dig into it just a little bit more. Then I'm okay waiting till February because I want Jill to come here and talk to the entire board. And then I'm comfortable with waiting till February to make the motion.
And even like you do the finance committee and then you basically in there could decide what this motion is. Then it comes to the board and then you could amend it. You could approve it as it is, or you could amend it, or,
We don't want people to start amending.
no. But just at some point in time, we need to know how much money we
Yeah.
spend.
Yep.
I mean,
And then
that's.
for board members who aren't on the finance committee, if you're, if at some point you're saying, okay, this is still a little bit fuzzy to me, this is an important decision, then please give Tim or Kim a call, and we'll sit down and talk about it a little bit more in depth, because it is a very important decision.
Well, I would definitely, just with, we're just on a side conversation here, but I would definitely err on the high side, just when we look at what healthcare costs have been doing. We're seeing a lot now, around the 20% again, and so that'd be my take. You know what, we don't know, but I would at least go on that side of things if we're gonna go one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think when Jill comes next month and presents, I mean, she's the one that really truly understands how this study is put together and what it means. And so I think your questions to her are gonna be important.
Plus,
for-
she's in other school districts as well, so she has a pulse on what other school districts are doing.
So we no longer use the people from Florida?
No,
Okay.
we got kind of a little mad.
Oh, okay.
We don't have a temper.
Can
But when it blows, it blows.
We won't say on TV about that whole situation. Can you go to your little schematic one last time?
Yep,
This was helpful to me because, for two reasons.
do you want the general fund or
No, I mean,
doesn't it matter?
this is good because, when I looked at community ed, the middle one, and I saw that there's 10 employees that have the accumulated sick leave and pension left. And it tells me that in the next probably 6 to 8 years, we owe that amount. But the other good news is, we're done with that
Be
then.
done.
And I think that's another thing that we've been able to do in contracts. And we knew that it was gonna take time. It was gonna take time for us to go through it, put money aside during that time, and as we switched to the 403B match and pay as you go, that was definitely our goal, and it's, it's gonna get very close in the food service as well during that 6 to 8 time frame. And then if we go down to the other employees, the larger employee group, it's going to happen. It's just, it's gonna be pretty close there too. So 6 to
Right.
8 years from now, there'll be about 20 to 30 employees that we're then setting aside in this area.
Right,
But then, as you know, the health insurance is the one where those costs keep growing, and so that's, of course, continued conversation as well.
yeah.
But still, and I wasn't here for this, but thank you to those of you that were for having the foresight to
Cap and close?
to see this and identify it as a potential issue going forward and putting us in position. I mean, this is
Well, like
much better than we could have been, that's for certain.
Well, like Ben said, for the board members who were here then, and the other board members that weren't here, it was very, very difficult because we were just coming out of statutory operating debt, and we had asked our tax-paying citizens to give us more money to lower class sizes. And so then all of a sudden, not only were we having to do that, but we were having to bring balance to this too. And the board made those tough decisions back then, and like Dan said, we didn't know back then how wise it was. It was tough because we had to, and we were able to fulfill our promises. Right now kindergarten, we have 17 to 18 in a class. First grade, we have 22, 23, and so we've been able to do that. But I think you represent the taxpayers, and you echo that this is what they want as well, so.
We promised lower class sizes and fiscal responsibility.
Which is tough to do.
Yeah, I know it is, but that's what we promised, and we did both, so.
Yeah.
Boy, Dan.
See if you can create more of those special ed problems with the funding.
That's right.
It's a good thing.
Kept saying it, Tim. Make sure they know 4.7 is budgeted, and we're not gonna get into that again.
Now comes
We
this.
can't think there's
now
gonna
comes
be
even,
500.
Now we're switching gears, and Kim's gonna walk you through, in other years at this time, we'd have the 5-year projection,
Yep.
where if your revenues are here, and then health insurance goes up this amount. And we've gone away from that a little bit this time, and we're gonna explain to you why we are, but I think in the end, you've heard me say it, cost of doing business always goes up. Because transportation goes up, health insurance goes up, liability insurance, the cost of doing business always goes up, and it doesn't matter if you have 5,000 students in your school, or 4,500, you've got to operate the buildings, you've got to operate the buses. And I've said that usually if you're over budget by 500,000, it's going to double the next year. It's just, I don't know why, but that's typically where we're at. So if we're 500 to 700,000 over at the end of the current year that we're in, you're probably already guessing in your mind what Kim is going to paint as a picture for what we'd be over budget heading into the 2017-18 school year. But with that, Kim's going to walk us through some of the things that we've been talking about and looking at. So Kim?
Okay, so basically, where we're at right now, and this is the most frustrating time to try to do a projection because the teachers aren't settled for the next 2 years. That's our biggest cost in the district. Legislation isn't settled. So really, any projections that we do, they're not very good, I guess. So what I did was I just projected next year, and then we can kind of go from there. So if you open up that packet, on one page you see the same page with the yellow line, and then on the left-hand side is, I'm going to tell you what I did to get to this. So basically what it's showing is that if nothing changes, you're going to be 1.5 spending expenditures over revenue. Okay? So, is that upside down?
Yes.
There's a way to.
Yeah, go edit. Go up to the menu,
You just
or
right click.
view,
If
sorry.
you go down.
If you right click, it'll drop down, you have the option.
Because sometimes there's a rotate right
Yeah.
on
You're
there.
techie. You don't need any.
Fix it.
I wanted to see if you were paying attention.
Can we always pay attention? You don't want to end up with a dying floor.
Okay. So the first thing I did is I did do the 5-year projection in the enrollment model that we use from school finance. And basically what it does is it does a 4-year average is what it calculates in there. So what that showed was that our pupil units for 17-18 would be 4,784. And so that's 74 less than this current year.
74 pupil units, which is
That's
different
the
than
weighted, that's the.
belly buttons.
Yeah, this is the
in the
weighted
district.
amount, yeah. So hopefully come next October, it's actually better than that, not worse than that. So that's what was used for pupil projections. For the formula, I added 1.5%, so this is based on that we got 1.5%, that it would be 6,158 per pupil unit. So what that did between the drop in enrollment and then if we get the increase in the aid, that reduced aid and levy by 107,000. That's reflected in this budget. And then the other aid that I looked at increased by 88,366. And 65,000 of this is compensatory. Remember I said you'd see in this budget where the compensatory went. It always flip-flops back and forth. And then I put down here, if we would get 2%, then there's 143,511 that's not in this budget. So now we're talking things that aren't in the budget. Okay, then on the expenditure side, I moved all the teachers up a step, but I did not put any increase in the salary schedule. So then what this is saying, and this is for Fund 1 only, I don't calculate the community ed in here. So if you add 1% to the teacher's salary, that's going to change this budget by $215,616. If you add 2%, it's going to change this budget by $431,000. And then there's the department chairs, the coaches, all those miscellaneous. You know, if you do 1%, 2%, that's what the change would be, the 1,000 or the 2,300. And then there's nothing in this budget for lane changes, so we know that on average we get around 50,000 every year for lane changes. And then in this budget, the health was updated to an additional 4%. We had talked about not at this health insurance committee, but the prior one, what are we gonna use for projections? And we had kind of decided on 4%. So that's what was used in here, this budget. And then there was also 2% for dental, which we might not have to do now, but we'll see.
Well, we probably would.
Yeah,
Yeah, we'd probably keep it at 2% and then
Well, but
change
this,
it going forward.
this is for 17-18, so,
Yeah, it's
oh,
still
that
under
is
2 years.
17, okay.
Yeah.
18-19 is the one that we might not
Right.
have to. Okay, then all of the other contracts are negotiated, so the salaries that are in this budget are the actual salaries for like principals, secretaries, business office, everybody else. And then their health was increased by 4% and their dental by 2%. Okay. I didn't want to move that. Okay, and then so for some other expenditures, the transportation contract is up. So if it's 1% increase or 2% increase, it tells you what the dollar amount's gonna be. Utilities, if there's a 1% or 2%, I put what the dollar amount would be. Work comp, I didn't put anything in here. We're kind of staying pretty flat on that. So I don't think we'll get a reduction again, but hopefully it just might stay flat. Property and liability, I put if there was 2% or 3%. And then you see where it says the GASB OPEB, so that's where that decision of yours, is it gonna be an additional 250,000 or 503,000? So you take the current budget where it's 1.5 expenditures over revenue, and depending what happens here, you're gonna add 500,000 to 1 million to that. And then if 5 teachers retire, then it's a savings to that budget of 206,000. So then, if you come to the very bottom on the left-hand side, okay, so this budget right now, your ending fund balance is gonna be 11,462,961. At the same time last year, when we were doing these projections, and that was without knowing all that special ed stuff, we were projecting that at the end of 17-18, the fund balance would be 9,434,000. So it's 2 million better than our projection last year, and which makes sense because it's 600,000 for 3 years special ed aid. That's how fast it tripled. So by this budget, if the expenditures are over by 1.5 million, it's still better than where we thought we were gonna be a year ago, is what I'm saying. Then if you come across, if this first column would happen and expenses would increase 561,000, then your ending fund balance would be 10,900,000, which would be 1.46 million better than what you projected last year. Are you following what I'm trying to show? And then if it would be 1 million, your ending fund balance would be 10.3, which would be 951,000.
Right, and
But if you look down there though, if you remember Tim said doubling.
Yes,
Okay,
that's-
so if
that's
the
the
next
big-
year it doubles to 5 million, you only have 3 million left from 10 million to 7 million where you hit your fund balance. You can't really go below that. You can, you'd have to change your fund balance policy, but then you're really looking at probably at the very least in 18-19 you would have to cut 2 million.
yeah. and-
You know, so
yeah,
it's like,
these
you know,
No
these-
change in
What do you-
17-18.
Yeah,
Yeah,
these
it's
these
kind of like, what do you
numbers
cut,
bear out.
yeah, what do you cut now when you don't even really know what your costs are
Yeah,
gonna be?
these numbers bear out. It's always tough to look at that and say, oh, we have this fund balance of X. But you have to remember that if you don't do anything,
Right.
you're kicking the whole can down the road, and it's going to get
Yeah.
way worse the next year.
Yeah.
So then, the rest of this in here, it just shows you what the 5-year projection of pupil units was, which that changes every year when we do it. And then it shows the staffing that was used. And then the one page where it says schoolfinance.com. I'm reading upside down.
You're just gonna push through.
It'll show you what I used for kindergarten projections across. So then at this point, I think it's more Tim?
Yeah,
discussion?
and for tonight, I did not want to get into a heavy discussion on, even though I have on my thing budget reduction discussion, I'm not going to get heavy in that tonight. I just want to recap some points again, and that is, we changed it, we didn't get into the 5-year projection, but I can tell already that you're all smart enough to figure out that it's going to double down the road and it's going to increase, and it's not going to be just small numbers, because you've all been through this before. But if you go to, a chem sheet here, and that yellow, we're talking a year from now. This is the
Right.
the 2017-18 school year. Just by moving staff up a step and no percentage increase, and if we get 1.5% from the state of Minnesota, we're gonna be 1.5 million over budget. And then in your own mind, you start to think, well, how many of these other things will happen? So you see that as a base, and then you start thinking over here in red, well, what will our transportation contract get settled at? What will some of the other contracts get settled at? How many teachers will we have retire? Because we usually save money on those. So in your own mind, then you're starting to think. And that's one of the questions I'll be asking the finance committee. Which way do they like it presented better? A baseline of what we think it's going to be with these other options for you to be thinking about in your own head? Or the old way where we would just say, okay, if salaries go up 1.5%, we're going to carry that through for 5 years. If we get 1.5% from the state of Minnesota, we're going to carry that through for 5 years. If health insurance goes up 4%. And of course, the big factor that threw off that 5-year projection was the special ed aid. And as Kim said, when you're getting $600,000 each year for 3 years, that's where it's 1.8 million better. Otherwise, we were very, very close on what we're projecting.
The other districts around us have the same type of difficulty due to the special aid.
Yes.
Yeah.
So later on, when we get to the end of the meeting here, I'll be asking the finance committee because if I can meet, I'd like to meet next week sometime if possible. I know it's the holidays and everything, but if not, I'd even meet right after Christmas with the finance committee if people aren't, because I want to meet with them prior to the organizational meeting, because at our organizational meeting, that's more of we organize, but then we turn it into a work session. And then we get into our regular board meeting. So at the end of tonight's meeting, I'm going to want to talk to the finance committee. I'm going to want them to stay afterwards and say, hey, what do you think? When can we meet?
Only if you promise to keep this positive, upbeat attitude. We've always been talking about this fiscal cliff, but we promise that we have an extra year before we go over that.
How fast do you want to drive
That's
towards it?
almost, the glass isn't completely empty.
Well, no comment at this time. It's still,
That's the best you could have expected.
Yeah, I know.
we still know what our enrollment is doing.
Sounds to me like
That's
we
the
should put out
most
that meeting till January.
Consistent and troubling.
Yeah, we still know what
Number.
our enrollment is doing.
Yeah.
And with that, any other questions for
Yeah,
Kim and I at this
Do other
time?
people have questions, comments, thoughts on any aspect of it at this time?
Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot of work, so.
I was talking to the other districts that make up the 917, and I know that you were frustrated by how far off you were because of the special ed aid. It sounds to me like Hastings was as close as anybody anyways. So, I mean, it really had other districts baffled completely. So good job.
I mean, it's financially, I'd say it's really good news on our levy side. And I'd say on our budget side, it's nothing surprising to any of us. It's because of the declining enrollment, we know what continues to keep coming our way and that we as a board and as a community keep dealing with.
There is something else you brought up during your discussion, and you talked about the day when you might retire. As long as you brought that up.
I'm gonna bring you to the cliff and say goodbye.
I know that you have,
Then you come back and
I
say
won't do
enrollment
that.
is up 10%.
Yeah.
I know you have an excellent staff, and people do a lot of good work. And I know you've worked for years and years and years on the systems we have in the district, both with respect to the audit and funds and accountability and all sorts of things. Like a couple of years before you decide to retire, can you try to help us make sure that we
Well,
have some sort of
We
succession?
always have that talk.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
what are you thinking? And I did say that, I would say a year before.
Because we have benefited, and you have the right not to do that, but we have benefited
No.
so much from your conservative.
And it will be mid-year. I think that's the better time for a business person to retire. Not in July when you're right in the middle of the audit and getting the budget ready for the next year.
We don't want to take your work for granted, and I know Tim doesn't, so. Thank you, again.
Every district will go on no matter who leaves. It just
Yeah,
works
but
out
we
that
want
way.
to go on in the right direction, so,
The financial aspect seems to be very important.
yes.
So, do we have first we need a motion, did you want to do anything else?
No, I just, one that ties in, we had a health insurance committee meeting right before this. I just want to let the board members know again that good news from two aspects. We're healthy overall as a school district and our employees, and then that ties into our self-funded is doing well because we are healthy. So that trend, we're very, very fortunate, specifically at a time when we first decided to go self-funded. I know I was nervous. I don't know how nervous Kim, but I was nervous because we didn't know the numbers that clearly, and we had some good faith, and it's turning out quite well on both the health and the dental side. So that's positive news for us as a district as well.
Cool. Can we have a motion to approve the 2016 payable 2017 levy back from the taxation?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And a motion to approve the revised budget for the 2016-2017 school year.
I'll motion.
I'll second.
Any discussion on that? Motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And the 2016-18 Community Ed Coordinators Contract.
And it's falling right in line with all of our other percentages that we've talked about.
A motion.
Second.
Any discussion?
Does this mean that we have a community ed coordinator?
Different?
No, that's the director.
That's the director.
Okay, all right.
And that's,
All right.
the answer is that Joe was on the interviews with that. We had really good interviews, and I was at the TIES conference Monday and Tuesday, so I'm following up and I'm meeting tomorrow. So we're pretty positive that we're going to.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And a motion to accept the resignation.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Motion to approve a termination.
Maybe not all of you were able, I sent out an email on this morning, maybe all of you weren't able to read it, but it's individual who's probationary. And so that's a decision made during the probationary period.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. And then there's some leaves. You know, we ought to encourage people to have as many kids as possible. So the more parental
Yeah,
leaves.
the parental leave, go,
Yeah,
go.
we're liking it.
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. We have the Alice training coming up, the district-wide security training.
And I think for as board members, I'm not expecting you to have to attend it, but But if you are,
I'm going to.
get there early and get a
I'm
seat
planning to
because it's
attend.
going to be packed. But if you are there, I think there's two meat and potatoes if you were to choose from. And I would say from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock is where you would hear from our administrators and Officer Bauer, the training and the reason why we're going to it. That'd be like from 8 till 10. And then if you wanted to sit in on a session where you saw staff practicing it and simulations, where there'll be, in a pod area of the high school, there'll be 25 in a classroom on this side of the pod, 25 over here, 25 here, so there'll be 100 people in one area, and then there'll be actual live simulations. That would be from 10:20 till noon. To me, those would be the two if you wanted to choose from one of those. Then in the afternoon, after lunch, at 1 o'clock, people back at their sites. So for example, the middle school, all the district office here, we'll go down and meet with Mark and we'll just talk about some of the site situations here. And then we'll come back to the district office and we'll talk about, well, what would we do here? McCullough Elementary will be doing the same at 1 o'clock. They'll all meet with Matt Esterby and they'll talk about, well, what would we do in our cafeteria? What would we do in our gym? And then they go down a hallway. So if you couldn't be there all day, if you have any time at all, the meat and potatoes is from 8:15 to 10. Well, you hear the reason why. You'll see some of the demonstrations. 10 to noon would be live simulations with active things happening. That's all I can say. So to me, those would be the two core things to consider going to.
Awesome, thanks, Tim.
January 4th, 17th, 18th. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Nope.
Is the lunch really at noon or is it 11?
Well, you're kind of breaking
I'm
out.
sorry, it's 11:30.
You're breaking out at 11:30.
No, she's not talking about that.
Oh.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
high school
I got
student
that. I'm on
Oh,
to meeting dates.
okay.
It's,
11:30.
yeah,
Okay,
they
thank you.
changed it this year.
Yep.
Facility committee members, we are meeting next Wednesday with Scott McQueen at 3 o'clock. I'm anticipating about a 45-minute to hour meeting.
Okay.
I think he's just trying to get us geared up as we go into January. Just for the rest of the board to know, our e-news and Russ's letter to the editor, we probably had, I'd say 6 to 8 people that connected with me out of the blue and said, yeah, I'd like to get back. I'd like to be on that committee. And then Deanne has followed up with some of the names that some of you have given me. So I'm pretty confident that we're going to get that 15 members on that. So, and then at the end of the meeting here, when we do close, I would like to have the finance committee members come sit with me and let's look at our calendars and see if we can, when we could get together.
Want to make a motion to adjourn?
I will make the motion to adjourn.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thanks, everybody.